Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the AMCHAM webinar on digital identity for digital trust society. What is a decentralized identity and why it matters? I am Michael Claiborne, Government Affairs Manager at AMCHAM Korea. Today, we are excited to be joined by two experts who will explore how decentralized identity technology can fundamentally change the way people interact in a digital society. Our first speaker is Mr. Henry Lee, Head of Strategy of ICONLOOP, a leading blockchain company in Asia. Our second speaker is Mr. Min Kim, founder of ICON Project, one of the world's premier public blockchain projects. Before we begin, I will go over a few technical details. Please note that all audience displays and microphones are turned off by default. If you have questions at any time, please feel free to share them by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now, I would like to ask you to give your attention to our first speaker, Mr. Henry Lee of ICONLOOP. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to have a great session today talking about our identity in today's digital society. We'll start with a quick introduction like how these things are usually kicked off, okay? So I'm Min Kim, and I've been working in the finance and technology industry for the past 15 years. About 5 years ago, I was Chief Strategy Officer at a fintech company in Korea called Daily Financial Group, which is where I met the other speaker, Henry Lee. We worked together on many different projects, but we spent a lot of time on blockchain because it's such an important technology for the future. We ended up incubating a blockchain company called ICONLOOP, where we built blockchain solutions for enterprises. Henry is still at ICONLOOP, but as for me, I'm on the board at an affiliated organization called ICON Foundation, which is where we do a lot of research and development for an open source blockchain technology called the ICON Project. The difference between ICONLOOP and ICON Foundation could be a bit confusing. I think the best comparison could be similar to how Linux Foundation and Red Hat company operates. The foundation manages the open source free-to-use software, whereas ICONLOOP builds revenue-generating businesses by using this software. So Henry, before I go further, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Well, thanks, Min, and thank you everybody for joining us today. And I think Min actually have done a great job of introducing myself and our companies. So as Min mentioned, we actually started our career as an investment banker together, but as luck would have it, we were able to incubate a blockchain company together, and we've been working hard for the past 4 years trying to pioneer a new industry. So all in all, I'm very grateful to be here today, and I would also just like to express my gratitude to James and his team at AMCHAM for preparing such a wonderful event for us. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So today, I guess Henry and I are going to talk about digital identity. We're going to be talking sort of like podcast or fire chat like style, but behind the scenes, this is what Henry and I usually do for work. So we usually call up each other and we just talk more casually. I'm actually based in San Francisco today. Henry is based in Seoul. So we actually have to do a lot of communication. So Henry is focused on digital identity at ICONLOOP, and he's the expert today. We're going to be going through what we call decentralized identity, or what we call self-sovereign identity. But before we do all of that, I think it's important for us to take a step back and first talk about the concepts behind identity. So Henry, we talked about this before many times. What exactly is identity? Can you break it down for us on what identity is? Also touch upon what some of the challenges are in creating digital identity.
Sure, of course. So I think, so we could kind of think about it together along the way. So what is identity? Well, identity is obviously what I say about me, and it's also what others say about me. That my name is Henry Lee, that I'm 33 years old, that I live in Seoul, Korea, that I graduated from George Washington University, that I used to work at JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, and now at ICONLOOP. and that I love to cycle and play golf. These are all part of my identity.
Also,
So then,
question.
right. Then how is identity conveyed? Well, historically and typically it was mostly verbal. So you meet a person and you tell them about yourself, but these are what I call unverified information. You actually need to trust the person you're talking to in order for that identity to be correct. So it wasn't really scalable at all. You need to know the person that you're talking to in order for the system to be scalable. Then we moved on a bit and we moved on to official papers, which allow trust to be formed on a local scale. So as long as people trust the issuer and you present the documents, the papers, and people were able to trust that specific aspect about you.
Right.
And now time passed. The modern day identity is mostly photo IDs, your driver's license, your passport, which essentially expanded the trust to a broader scale, and for passports, sometimes to a global scale. And this works fine most of the times, at least in the real world. So let's move on and think about, where does identity actually used? What are some typical, identity transactions? The most basic identity transaction would be the example before. You meet a person, maybe at a conference, and you introduce yourself. But again, this is unverified. Then, so how about verified identity transactions? I think the easiest example would be when you go to a convenience store or a bar and you want to buy a drink. The cashier is going to ask for some ID. You give him or her your driver's license. He looks at the photo, see if the photo matches you. He sees when you were born to see if you're over 18 or 21, who issued the driver's license. Does it look authentic? If he thinks it's a valid credential, he'll give you your drinks. But if you look at this example very closely, there are two unique aspects of a concept that Min just spoke before, the self-sovereign identity. One, there's actually no relationship between the cashier and the issuer of the driver's license. There is no interaction whatsoever. So the cashier actually doesn't need to call up, let's say, the city of Seoul or the Korea Police Agency to verify if my credential, my driver's license is actually valid.
Right.
So this actually provides extreme scalability. The issuer doesn't need to verify the information every time someone wants to verify certain credentials. And two, the fact that the government, assuming is the issuer of the driver's license, doesn't know when I'm using my ID, where I'm using it, and for what purposes. And this actually ensures a lot of privacy features.
Yeah.
So the concept of self-sovereign identity is quite simple. It basically means that you control your identity and your credentials without the need to rely on intermediaries or central authorities like the government. That you have control over how your data is shared and used. So now kind of stepping back again and going back to today's original topic, what is digital identity? Well, if you think about it, we have site registrations where you fill in a bunch of information about yourself to every website you use for the first time. And I'm sure everybody has done it many, many times throughout their lives. And obviously, this is a bit of a hassle and seems unnecessary. And also, there are very less trust cues, meaning in the real world, you actually see the person you're talking to and you hear their voices. So you can actually recognize, and that actually provides huge amount of assurance about someone's identity. But you have less assurance about someone's identity online because you can't really see the person, you don't really hear the person. Hence, it's very difficult. So what about ID password? But I think ID password is just authentication. It only proves that you actually have the login credentials. It actually has nothing to do with your identity, so to speak. So how do we actually mimic the real world? Where is my digital driver's license and where is my digital passport? How can I prove anything about myself online? Well, right now you can't. Today, verified digital identity is not something that I provide to the site, but what the site knows about me. So to them, I'm actually simply a directory entry in their database.
Mm-hmm.
And because of this, today's identity needs to rely on single authority, the website or the internet service provider. And today's digital identity has no credential choices. Your data is not portable. Everything is all in a silo. It's very site-centric architecture. An easy example would be like eBay or Coupon. So you sell some of your stuff on eBay, you buy some of your stuff on Coupon, and you build your reputation. But what happens if you move to, let's say, Craigslist or Shinsegae shopping? Your data is definitely not portable. So then is that really your reputation or is that eBay's reputation? And this is where we start to see problems arise around companies that control too much of people's data.
Okay, I mean, a few things I wanted to kind of point out is that I guess digital identity today, how it's designed, you have a issuer who is also a verifier. So every time you use your digital ID, it needs to be verified by the issuer. So the issuer knows everything that you do. I'm trying to think of some of the ways that identity is used in the digital world today. Like these days, I'm stuck at home due to COVID ID. We all are here in the US. And I do a lot of online shopping and I order groceries from Amazon Fresh. And whenever I do, order some beer or some alcohol, there's no verification process digitally. So whenever the delivery comes, I still need to show them my physical ID in order for them to check, drop it off, and leave. So something like a true digital identity is needed for something like that, in my opinion. The other part is, kind of taking a step back and thinking about digital identity. The earliest type, internet identity I could remember that actually got into a large scale is Facebook Connect. Facebook Connect was used everywhere, but there's obviously a lot of flaws because you can pretend to be somebody else. So it's not very credible identity, I would say. And I think everyone would agree with me. And Facebook knows, every website that I visited. So I think that itself is quite disturbing. And obviously Facebook uses a lot of the data. And we'll talk more about data later today. In Korea, I guess the telecom companies do a lot of ID verification. I'm sure they know every website that you visited. Would you agree that we share perhaps too much information to telecom companies today through their digital ID system?
I definitely do. So example like Facebook and telecommunication companies in Korea is quite similar. They actually provide some level of easiness to the users. To some extent, it actually improves user experience. So things like single sign-on. I'm sure everyone have seen where you could actually, sign in using your Facebook ID or sign in using your Kakao ID. It's actually convenient for the user's perspective. But if you think about it, then the web service providers is going to ask Facebook for your identity verification every time you log in, meaning Facebook actually has access to the activities and the data being created on that website. So there's a concept of platform monopoly and platform capitalism, which I obviously won't go into details, but it's a huge problem, and I think more and more people are aware of this, which obviously as we will discuss further in today's session.
Right. So let's go into a little bit deeper with DID or decentralized ID. There's a lot of talk about DID or self-sovereign ID today. I actually think this term DID is getting more and more popular. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think more people are talking about DID because there is a general interest and increasing interest in the concept of digital identity and privacy in general. And many people think DID is a solution to this issue, this global issue. And as you know, there has been many data-related incidents in the past few years. 2017, the Equifax became one of the worst data breaches in the corporate history. It exposed personal information of over 147 million individuals, including their social security numbers, date of birth, home addresses, driver license, credit card numbers, and etc. And in 2018, the all-famous Cambridge Analytica incident, which led to an investigation of Facebook for failing to safeguard 87 million user profiles. And about a couple months ago, we talked about this a lot, but Twitter was hacked. People like Elon Musk was asking people to send him Bitcoin and he'll double the amount for the next 1 hour or so. And we're, because of all these incidents, we're seeing governments from all around the world implementing more stringent laws and regulations regarding consumer data protections. So the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, went into effect in 2018. In the US, the California state also passed the California Consumer Protection Act, CCPA. And obviously both of these are an effort to create a better standards for data and privacy. But this all goes back to how we manage data on the web today. And because of the way our internet is structured, we, the users, have unintentionally turned large web service providers like Facebook or Google to take the role as an identity management organization responsible for storing, protecting, and using my personal data. And unfortunately, our current architecture holds too many problems to just simply ignore. So now DID, which is short for Decentralized Identifier, it's a new type of identifier on the digital world. It's a completely new way of tackling digital identity. It enables verifiable data to be controlled by the original owner without the need to rely on central registry or identity provider or certificate authorities. And many people, as I said, believes that DID is the new and is the most innovative way to solving an age-long problems around digital identity. And I think that's why more and more people are talking about it. Large institutions like IBM, Web3 Foundation, Web3C, W3C foundations, all these standardization bodies are actually talking about DID, and even more so in Korea as well.
Yeah, I want to kind of slow down here because I think you talked a lot and about, different, I guess, stakeholders in the DID ecosystem, how the ID works. So kind of for simplicity, I like to think of DID as a physical ID in a digital form. This means it has all the benefits of a physical ID, but you can carry it around on your mobile phone. But it's even better because if you lose your phone, then you can easily destroy the copy in your old phone and you could get a new one issued right away. So you won't have this issue of somebody carrying around your ID. So also, let's say when you travel and you lose your DID version of your passport, I think passport is the next big area where DID and identity needs to be solved. But I think it's really cool to think about how you could get your passport issued right away, in a digital way. So I just wanted to kind of step back and talk about digital ID. But of course, once we get into DID, we need to talk about blockchain technology. So let's talk a little bit about blockchain technology and how it's relevant here. You could think about blockchain. So many of you, for those of you who don't know blockchain, I'm just going to give a quick summary of how it works. You could think of blockchain as a multiple computers that are running the same database at the same time. There's many computers around the world you could think of it as running 24/7. And whenever new information is entered into the database, all the computers have to agree that the new information is valid. If a hacker wants to change the information in the database, it's almost impossible because the hacker needs to hack into all the computers at once. And that is extremely difficult. That is one of the key benefits of the blockchain technology, is called immutability. So think of your personal ID as information that lives in the database, in the blockchain database, and it makes sure that there's one copy of your mobile, one copy in your mobile phone, and there are no duplicates. So blockchain can make a digital ID into decentralized ID, but Henry, can you perhaps give much more higher level explanation of how this actually all works?
Right. So as I mentioned before, digital identity is one of the toughest problems in the internet, and many people have tried to solve it but couldn't. And there's many reasons why we actually couldn't create a valid digital ID. But one of the biggest challenge in mimicking real world identity in a digital manner is the fact that it's extremely easy to replicate, modify, share data on the web, just like how you share a file via email to your friends.
Right.
This is where the problem, this is actually the same problem that the developers face when they try to create digital money. And the question they had was, how do we actually create a digital money system that can be truly peer-to-peer, meaning there's no central banks, making sure that the numbers add up? And how do we systematically ensure that people are not copying and pasting money all around the web, the so-called double spending problems? So the need to create a better system for both digital money and digital identity has been discussed for decades amongst the smartest intellects and engineers. It was just not possible to make that concept into reality given the technical challenges we had. But the catch is, here's the catch. The blockchain, it was the first technology, as you explained, that allowed networks to systematically ensure that what I'm digitally presenting is indeed authentic, and that the data has not been tampered since its original issuance.
Right.
So having said that, let me briefly explain how DID works. So there are three parties involved in a DID transaction: the issuer, the owner, and the verifier. So if we were to borrow the convenience store example again, the government would be the issuer of the driver's license, and you're the owner of all the credentials that are included in your driver's license, like a name, date of birth, so forth. And the cashier is the verifier who wants to verify certain information about yourself. When the issuer issues certain verified information about myself, that information is stored on my mobile device, just like how you would store your driver's license in your wallet. And then you can decide when and how to present your data to a verifier that requires certain credentials about myself to be checked. So when you actually present your information, the verifier would check with the blockchain to make sure that no data was tampered and that it's indeed authentic, meaning it's not just copy and paste version of my digital photo ID. So decentralized identity or decentralized identifier is all about giving power and responsibility of my data back to myself. That I am able to prove something about myself in a digital world without Google actually looking into their database and saying, yep, we do know that about hihenrylee@gmail.com.
Yeah, I think that's I think the very important point to get across is that yes, the ID is very similar to money. You shouldn't be able to duplicate money. You shouldn't be able to duplicate ID as well, right? So, if you think about money, that's why in this digital age, before blockchain and cryptocurrencies came about, we had these credit card networks and banks as the gatekeepers. So they know exactly where our money is being spent. They have all the data. But now, blockchain is allowing true peer-to-peer transactions like cash. And I think the same is happening with the ID world, where now we get to pretty much see a true peer-to-peer use of your identification for whatever the reasons you would need in order to use a third-party service. So I'm going to throw a ethical question here. Do you think that the government or any entities should know what websites or mobile services that we use? I mean, there's always an argument that if you have nothing to hide, I mean, that's been the argument of a lot of the banks, right? When it came to money is, everyone that's using Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies have something to hide. That's why it should be illegal. But, there's always that argument that, then if you have something to hide, then, why does it matter if the government sees what you do or the bank sees what you do? Maybe, I can answer first here. I mean, what I personally fear is not actually my privacy. What I fear is that others can do what others can do with all the information that they get from me, or more collectively from, thousands and thousands of other people, to see like what is, trending, and, kind of using that data to manipulate that data in order to use for their benefits. So I fear that these companies can know more about me, than more than myself, and even perhaps control my behavior by using my data against me. So if I said this probably 10 years ago, it would have sounded like a sci-fi movie and a lot of people wouldn't have, believed me. But, it's amazing now, what these companies can do. And we've seen it through, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Cambridge Analytica that you just mentioned. So, it's quite scary what these companies or government can do with our data. So it's not always the privacy issue. Do you have anything that to add to this?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct, and it's actually funny, but there's a new Netflix series, Netflix documentary. It's called Social Dilemma. There's actually a topic exactly about what you just spoke. So people, when we think about privacy, data protections, people only think about from privacy aspect. Like, I don't want Facebook to know something about myself, or government to know what I'm doing and stuff. But actually, I think the problem that we're trying to solve, and the problem that we're trying to highlight here, is how our web, the architecture of our web, how our internet is architected, and that architecture is causing so much unintended consequences. So right now, all my activities in the web are stored, and the information and the activities are stored on a site-centric manner, meaning Facebook knows all about myself, Google knows all about myself, Google has all my information. So it's very site-centric. And because they have control over my identity, all my activities under that identifier get stored on Facebook. And this is actually the architecture we're trying to break by proposing a new paradigm to the whole way of how we, create, manage, and store data on the web in general. It's not that we dislike what Facebook is doing or what Google is doing, but the architecture of the web have made these problems, and this is very unintended consequences of the web, and we're just simply trying to solve that issue.
Got it. All right, moving on to the next part. I think it will be easier to kind of bring everything that we kind of talked about together, and thinking, I think for the listeners it might be easier to grasp everything with an example. So a couple of weeks ago on August 26th, ICONLOOP and Shinhan Bank being one of the top banks, the largest bank in Korea, had a big announcement. They announced that the first decentralized ID for the financial sector. The first significance of this news is that now you can go through KYC, or know your customer process with Shinhan Bank, and you can use that KYC information to open other accounts with other financial institutions. You were never able to do that before in Korea, and in other parts of the world, you still can't do that. So I think it's very significant that in Korea, ICONLOOP and Shinhan Bank is kind of pushing this new decentralized ID method and allowing ID information to be shared at the convenience for the user experience. The KYC process, as you all know, when I went to Korea, I opened a bank account, and it's just a painful process of not just showing your ID, kind of proving where you're, sometimes talking about where your funds came from, who your employer is, how you're going to get your money, and who you are. So they try to create a profile of you and try to understand that you are who you are. But the process of actually physically going in there to open your bank account is a painful process. And the next part is when I try to open another bank account or a brokerage account, I had to go through that process all over again, which was also, physically I had to be there. Of course, now with Kakao Bank and KT Bank, Korea has allowed non-face-to-face account opening, which is a huge improvement. But, we believe we could go a little further than that and allow, once you go through that KYC process, you could easily open other financial accounts at a click of a button. So, Henry, can you walk us through on how this ICONLOOP and Shinhan Bank's new product actually works?
Sure, of course. And I think, like you mentioned, at least in Korea, the financial industry has gone through tremendous digital transformation. And truly, a lot of the financial institutions actually are doing their best to keep up with the trend and even try to be on the forefront of these transformational innovations. For example, a Korean citizen, like you said, doesn't actually need to visit the traditional brick and mortar bank and just simply use their mobile application to open up bank accounts. But like you said, everyone who have tried it would agree that it's a lot of hassle. Apart from making sure that you are who you say you are and inputting various information by yourself, there's minimum about 2 to 3 different steps that you must take to properly KYC your identity. And this could include, taking a photo of your driver's license, doing a video call with a bank representative, making a small wire transfer from a different account, and etc. But these are all required by law for banks to undergo in order to ensure that your identity is indeed correct. And this is more difficult to do it on a digital manner because of all the issues and problems and challenges that I explained in the previous times of this session. And obviously, this is not the end of the story. You need to do this, every single time you sign up for financial services online, and you need to do it every single time you move service providers. So from banks to securities firms to credit card companies, you have to do it all over again.
Right.
And what we have done with Shinhan Bank is to incorporate this DID framework to their KYC process. Now, once you're KYC'd by Shinhan Bank, meaning you bank with Shinhan, either through online or offline methods, Shinhan as the issuer will issue the KYC credentials, which includes your name, Korean social security numbers, mobile phone number, date of birth, proof of bank account, and etc. And you as the owner will store such information on your mobile device. And with this credential issued to your DID, now you can present this information to another financial institutions, and that financial institutions, knowing that such information or credentials was issued by a trusted, third party, which is the Shinhan Bank, and by using blockchain to guaranteeing its immutability, they can now accept that information at a face value and help you set up a bank account, without going through a separate KYC process for themselves. And as we were, working this project with Shinhan Bank, we obviously were faced with a lot of regulatory hurdles. So we actually had to go to the Korean FSC, the Korean Financial Services Commissions, and actually receive a regulatory sandbox, allowing us to, bypass certain laws in certain banking laws in order to make this, process into a reality. And as I explained before, one of the reasons why the banks actually wants you to take a photo of your driver license and they require you to do it every time you open up a bank account is because if you send a digital copy of your driver license, it might be fake. You might just use Photoshop and then change some information on the digital photocopy of the driver license. And that's exactly why you needed to do this process every time you open a new financial services. But blockchain ensuring the immutability, the fact that no additions or modification has been made to the original copy of your driver's license photo, now the financial institutions can accept this again and again because they have assurance that no information has been tampered. So I think a lot of the financial industry players are welcoming this. They see this as a way to innovate their service, and they see this as a way to simply focus on their core value, which is providing customer with a better financial product. And we've only just launched this with Shinhan Bank, but other largest banks like IBK, KB, IBK, NH, and a lot of the securities firms like Mira Asset, KB, credit card companies like Samsung, all of these financial companies and institutions are working to integrate the service as we speak. And this is actually extremely benefitable for not only the users because it significantly improves their user experience, but but this also benefits the financial institutions a lot. If you think about it, the cumbersome KYC process is the single most vulnerable point when it comes to customer acquisitions and retaining customers and making sure that they move on to the next step of purchasing a financial product online. By allowing users to skip such a cumbersome process, as I said, the banks can now focus on their core value, providing financial products that benefits their customers. And by integrating this DID framework into their KYC process and their banking process in the future, it could greatly increase these turnover rates and improve their acquisition, but also retention.
Yeah, we both came from fintech background, so we work
Absolutely.
We work with so many fintech companies trying to provide innovative financial services, trying to compete with the larger financial institutions. But one of the biggest hurdles that we've always came across was what you just mentioned, the onboarding process. So, that's one of the parts that was very difficult for us. And we felt the law had to change in order to make the onboarding process a lot easier so that, I think the problem with financial innovation is that, if the KYC process is difficult, if the onboarding process is difficult, it doesn't matter how much financial innovation that you create, people are just not going to switch to another a better service because the switching costs are way too high for consumers. So, I think all in all, these type of, DID type of services, what we're trying to do is lower the bar of customer acquisition so that, in the end, the companies that, that bring innovation to the industry actually benefit from it. So I think that's one big key, point that I wanted to make is that, financial innovation, if we want financial innovation to happen, then we need an easier solution, an easier onboarding process. And I think this is what DID provides. But going a little bit further. Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely. I just want to chime in one thing here. I think I mentioned that, by allowing, KYC to be, the need to do KYC to be abstracted into a single API or SDK, it gives, so much freedom for the financial institutions to explore new opportunities. So for example, maybe if the onboarding process itself is easy enough, maybe each taxi ride or each Uber ride could be insurable. Maybe each Airbnb stay could be insurable if you could actually make a financial product which is easy to sign up for, and from the bank's perspective, from the financial institution's perspective, you're collecting all the information you are required to do by law, but yet still providing a extremely appealing user experience. Now these financial institutions can think about different ways of providing new financial products, and even think about providing new financial product that wasn't simply possible because of these cumbersome onboarding process, or how you collected information and how you needed to collect different information.
Exactly. And I wanted to get to the next significance of this Shinhan Bank and ICONLOOP news is that it's not just that this DID KYC information is limited to just financial sector, although I mentioned that this was the first, use case of this announcement. But, technically this, what ICONLOOP is allowed to do is use this DID and KYC information more broadly to non-financial services, to other industries. And I think it'll be good to explain, why do you think you need KYC level authentication for non-financial services?
Right. That's actually a very good question. We get that asked a lot. I discussed this briefly in the beginning, but one of the key criteria of building a successful digital identity is 1, data portability, and 2, credential choices. It's actually not that the non-financial service providers need to use such a high level of KYC, but rather what DID offers to the users is that they could choose what credentials to provide. So they may not need, so they don't actually need to provide all of the KYC credential they use in opening up Shinhan Bank to open up an account with Coupang or Naver. So maybe for some service providers, they only need your mobile phone number and your name to provide sufficient services. For some e-commerce companies, maybe they may need to only collect your name and home address for shipping. The important thing I think here is that the user is able to port any or all verified information about themselves, and that they could choose what information to provide. So in an essence, we're moving away, like I said, from a site-centric model where they maintain a huge amount of database about all of your identities and credentials, to a user-centric model where you have control over all your data and you can simply choose what aspect about your identity to provide.
Right.
So I also want to, briefly touch on other use cases, on other non-financial use cases of DID that many people, I think, at this stage of our pandemic would actually find it very interesting. We're currently collaborating with Jeju Island to use our DID technology for the purpose of COVID-19 contact tracing. It still hasn't, fully launched, so I may need to refrain from speaking too much about it. But the key point that we have emphasized to the Jeju governor was the privacy aspect and the data ownership aspect, that you are still, the service itself, the contact tracing service itself is not violating any of your privacy, and your data is controlled by yourself, not the Jeju governor or a platform companies like Naver or Kakao, which in the case of the other COVID contact tracing technology service that we use in Korea. So the actual service will go live in few weeks actually, and it will aim to service 15 million tourists that visits the island every year.
Right. I mean, for our listeners, yeah, I think the Jeju Island and ICONLOOP announcement has been a big news. It came out a few weeks ago as well, and I didn't really think we had too much time to cover this today, but it's a very good use case. There's a lot of news out. If you type Google ICONLOOP and Jeju Island, or in Korean or in English, you'll see how it will work. So there are different pieces of articles out there. One part that I did want to more expand what Henry just talked about is that, now that we're going into the era of mobility, we are in the era of shared economy, right? So Uber, Lyft, there's a lot of delivery services. We share cars. Airbnb is another big, use case, I think, for something like DID. But, we're moving into shared ownership of many different assets. And I remember very recently here in the US, Airbnb had a incident where one of the homes that was rented out, they had a big party, and then a few people got murdered. Very unfortunate event. But Airbnb kind of went back and looked through why the problem happened. And one of the key reasons is that they couldn't verify the person that they were actually renting out the unit to, because how everything works. It's not like the hotel where you check in and then you have to show your ID when you enter the hotel. They verify you in the check-in process. Airbnb, a lot of the times you just have keys that are in a box. You just take it out and you use it. So you don't really know who exactly is using the house, or who is the actual guest of your Airbnb. So I think with this shared economy becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, with our our lives becoming more mobile as we move forward. I know this whole COVID situation is not allowing us to be mobile at this current time, but when things go back to normal, I think DID and this whole shared economy is a huge opportunity going forward. Anything else that you wanted to add, Henry?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. I mean, we've been talking for about 40 minutes now, so we're very good on time. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time to kind of wrap things up, and also leave some time for questions. So a good, I guess, wrap up would be to kind of talk about the future of DID. We kind of touched upon it already, but so I want to say, so the bottom line of Decentralized ID, or DID, is DID is issued by a central authority like the government or banks, but there is no need for these issuers to continue verifying the ID every time that it is used. It's very similar to a physical ID. You don't need to report to someone every time you use your DID, which protects privacy and also allows quick scalability. Would you say that's a good summary, Henry?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I guess, how do you see DID evolving into the future? I mean, in Korea at the moment, the government of Korea has had this centralized issued ID system for over 20 years. Everyone in Korea hates it. Whenever they need to make financial transaction, you have to download the private key from using your USB key drive. You have to download a lot of these antivirus bloatware, and it only runs on Microsoft Explorer. Of course, with mobile, things got a lot easier, but the government finally came out and said, we're going to be ending this the centralized ID, and they're opening it up to more commercial companies like ICONLOOP. There's a bunch of other companies that are trying to create their own solutions right now. But I think things are getting very interesting. And the interesting part is that because ICONLOOP is working with banks, banks, I would argue, have second most credible, after the government themselves, second most credible credential or ID system because of the regulation. I mean, KYC process, as mentioned, is a rigorous process. You can't open a bank account until somebody in the bank verifies who you are. I mean, so it has a potential to become a national ID system now that the government decided they're not going to be a player in this market. I think that opens up, a lot of players to actually potentially come up with new solutions. How do you see this whole industry evolve, and how do you see DID be a part of that movement?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and we try to imagine the future ourselves as well. But think the one way to look at this, and one way to think about the future of DID and how actual adoption will happen, is thinking about who could actually drive this paradigm shifting movement. Well, to start with, the users, they have too many ID passwords to remember. I always forget my passwords. Right. So they probably love the idea, but of course they have little influence and probably won't pay for the adoptions. So moving on. So how about enterprises? They currently have multiple partners and different value chains. They rely currently on centralized systems. They obviously, it obviously poses a lot of problems, but it's going to take a lot of money to change existing infrastructures. The governments, they're moving away from centralized systems. Some government by going e-government, but they have too many departments, identity silos. They're pretty localized, and a lot of them, in a lot of cases, they have cross-jurisdictional issues. So, how about banks? We've seen a lot of financial frauds, phishing activities. So I'm sure they're highly motivated. As I mentioned, in practice, they already have existing, trust relationship with their customers. So that might actually work. But, the bottom line here is that, we need a lot of institutions to build a healthy ecosystem. And because of that, we're also part of this greater alliance movement called My ID Alliance with 80 other companies like Shinhan Group, NH Bank, IBK Bank, Samsung, Payco, and a lot of fintech and payment companies as well. And we as a partner are trying to build this ecosystem together, along with the help of the Financial Services Commission as well. So I would actually urge everyone to kind of join the conversation, be at least part of the alliance, to discuss how we could actually make this DID into a marketable product and expedite the adoption process for this innovative technology.
Cool. All right. Now we're hitting the 45 minutes mark. I want to leave at least 10-15 minutes for Q&A, and it looks like we have one question already on here. So before we get to Q&A session, perhaps do you have any last words, anything that you want to mention about about DID, the future of DID, or anything that we've missed in today's call?
Nothing much, but perhaps the last comment that I would make is that DID is a technological framework. It's not really a specific app. It's not really a platform. It's a technical framework. Obviously, a lot of the businesses will going to build business out of this framework, but it's important to think of DID not as a specific service, but as an opportunity for the future. So I think in the future, we would be able to store any data information about myself on a DID, not just the KYC information. So it could be your college diploma, a certificate you own, your office key card, which grants access to a building or your home, your tickets to a BTS concert, what restaurants you like, what food you enjoy, your payment receipts, you name it. So I really urge everyone to kind of join the conversation. And I think it's very important for all of us to try to think how we're going to build the next generation digital identity as we live in this digital society. So I think that will be my last word.
Great, thank you. I think you bring up a good point that DID is a framework. I get questions all the time. Some people asking, wait, but the future is biometric ID. Using your fingerprint as your ID. I mean, that's absolutely correct. That we also believe that in the future, biometrics will be a big part of your ID. But biometric is very similar to your facial feature or your name or your age. It is just one information about you that could be used to verify who you are. So biometric is a complementary data that could go into a DID framework. It's not something that is separate, that is replaced with DID. So I think DID could be a very confusing concept, and in the future we hope to have more of these sessions so that more and more people could learn about the benefits that the DID framework could provide. And this is exactly what our team, Henry, and we have over 100 employees in ICONLOOP that actually go out to government organizations and different companies to explain how DID works. Because as we kind of went through, there's so much benefits and so many potential and opportunities that DID could open up in the future for many different companies and organizations. So those are my last words, and we would like to move through the Q&A session. And the first question, I don't know if everyone could see this question, but it's from Michelle Chu. Hi, this is Michelle from PayPal. About international standards and interoperability, different countries may have different requirements. It makes compliance difficult, slow, and costly. Can you tell us what are hurdles and issues in this area? What are the solutions? That's a very good question. And I think Henry touched upon the Web3 standard and other parts, but Henry, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, very good question. We're actually are in the process or in the process of discussing this exact issue with multiple global banks. There are actually two. One is a US bank and one is a European bank. And what we're trying to do, at least at this point, is it will be very difficult for them to receive the KYC credentials that Shinhan issued directly. So Bank of America will have a hard time accepting a credential issued by Shinhan. So what we're trying to do at this right now is these global banks actually have corporate branches in Korea. We're working with the corporate branches in Korea, and perhaps they'll be able to accept what Shinhan issues. And internally within this global banking system, global bank system, they could find a way to, work with what this Korean branch have collected and convert that into their global standards in US or in Europe. So I think it requires, providing a solution to this problem requires different parties to reach a consensus. But I think the initial approach here is to work with global banks, Korea branch, and then try to help these Korean branches find a way to abide by their global compliance or standards. I think that's our approach at this point. I hope that kind of answers your questions.
I just wanted to add, correct me if I'm wrong, Henry, but I think right now we're still extremely early when it comes to DID. I think that's obvious. And talking to government and different organizations about the benefits of DID. So, and the technology is still very early. So ICONLOOP and other companies that we know outside of Korea, in the UK or in the US, are all trying to figure this out within a local compliance framework. So, I think in the future, of course, we need to think about how, compliance, how to go through a lot of these hurdles internationally. But, I think we got to first think about what are the hurdles that we need to overcome domestically and make sure that this technology can be used just within Korea. And, as a technology company, ICONLOOP has been openly sharing a lot of our experience and knowledge and even kind of technical documentations with foreign international companies and other technology companies. It's funny that we had this session today because just this morning we had a call with a company called R3, which is another blockchain company, much bigger than ICONLOOP, and they are thinking about or in the early phases of interoperability and coming up with different frameworks for digital ID and architectures and all that. So, and then we just had discussions about how we are working here in Korea, how we're educating our local officials, the government and organizations to adopt different things. And one of the key interesting part was that in Korea, as we mentioned today, is I think the only country where it allows financial institutions to share KYC information. And that is, as Henry explained, due to the fact that we got the special license, special approval from the government, from the FSC of Korea, from the regulators, financial regulators. And other parts of Europe and other parts of the world still don't have that permission to do that, even domestically. But I think these type of regulations will change as we move forward and we start to prove out that the technology is very safe to use, that is scalable, and it protects privacy, everything that we mentioned. And I think at one point, we're already starting to talk with these international companies on how to make our technology interoperable with each other. So I think in the future, we're already talking with other banks as well. So, I think it's all only a matter of time where we figure out how exactly this compliance systems will work and how we could scale with internationally and globally. So I think those are kind of interesting, those will be interesting developments in the future, but right now I think it's a little bit too early. I think one last answer would be good, question. So hi Henry, you mentioned that an advantage of DID is that the user is able to choose the information that they want to provide when you talked about non-financial sector applications. Since users currently do not provide more information to these sites than they are required to, how does that address the current problem of centralized databases?
Well, I guess if you look at specific examples or specific service providers, it may appear to you that they do not collect any more information than that is required. But if you look at the architecture of it carefully enough, you'll find that they as a service provider, collect not only something about your identity, but they're collecting all the activity level under your identifier that they collect and they possess and they control. So in these small and specific use cases, maybe the problem may not appear as severe as the one that I explained, but the important thing is, under the current architecture, we will not be able to solve platform monopolies, data protections, privacies. These problems and issues is going to get worse and worse as we build and live in a digital society and our activities and transaction increases in this digital society. So the important thing is to, switch the framework of how we actually manage and own data. It's not about specific use cases, but it's more about changing the underlying architecture. And I think that is why I re-emphasize that DID is a framework rather than, I would urge everyone to think DID as a framework rather than a specific service providers that is provided by specific companies. And I'll be more than happy to have more discussions about your specific questions or anything that's regarding DID. I'm hoping that AMCHAM will be able to kind of help facilitate those connections as well.
Great.
Yeah, I think that brings us to the end of our program. So thanks to both of our great guests, Henry and Ming, for that great discussion, and to everyone who participated. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.